All right, okay, we'll start properly now. Okay, happy Sabbath, everyone, by the way. It's really nice to see you all here again. Those of you that have been to some of my previous seminars will know this is now the third one on the topic of evolution. And I hinted at it at the end of the last one that we'd be looking at Genesis for this particular session because of where we left it last time. And this is quite a sensitive topic. And it's a kind of topic that has caused many questions to arise in the minds of people throughout the ages. And I've titled this lecture, Same Genesis, Two Stories, Your Choice. So we're going to have a look at maybe a different way of looking at things that gets presented out in the media. And at the end of it, you can decide who it is that you want to believe. That's the point of this. I should say right at the beginning that a lot of the content here is based on the work of Professor Walter Veith, the scientist and Seventh-day Adventist. Basically, a lot of it comes from three of his particular lectures, and there's a fact sheet there as usual, and the names of those three lectures are there at the bottom. So if you want to go away and do your own research, because it's more detailed in those lectures, then you can as well. Right, so we're going to launch straight into this. We're going to be looking at old Darwin. And we're going to have a look at about his mindset, why he came to some of the conclusions that he came to, and then we're going to be having a look at some of the evidence, and we'll be looking at it from two different points of view. So, we'll be casting new light on this, something that the media doesn't tend to tell us about, and then you can make an informed choice right at the end of the seminar if you haven't decided already, of course. Okay, so let's have a look at the first slide. So this is Darwin here, as you will probably recognise him. And this is the time he decided to take up the position of ship's naturalist on a ship called the HMS Beagle. And this was in 1831. He was a young man, 22 years old. He was a bright young man. He also had theological training. And while he was on this ship, he agreed that he would be looking at the diversity of species around the world. This journey was lasting 4 to 5 years altogether. And he also agreed that he would draw maps of South America as well. So basically, they were giving him a map and say, if you could fill it in as you go along, that'd be lovely. So he had a number of jobs there. When he boarded the ship, he took with him a book, there it is, by a gentleman called Charles Lyell, who wrote a book called The Principles of Geology, in which, for one of the first times, the idea was set out that the world was a lot older than the Bible would have you believe. So long time frames, that idea was beginning to be planted in the young Darwin's mind. And Darwin is often credited as being the founder of the theory of evolution, but in fact, naturalistic ideas have been around for a long, long time, even back to the time of the Greeks before that. And Charles Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, was also a proponent of naturalistic ideas. While he was on this ship, he started to come up with the idea, and he was looking at these the creatures, the idea of something called natural selection. And this is the idea, I touched on this when we did the dinosaurs lecture, but this is the idea of the survival of the fittest. So basically, that species would weed out the inferior parts of the species and the stronger ones would survive. But that theory does have certain drawbacks to it. Firstly, it might explain the survival of the fittest, but it does not explain the arrival of the fittest. It doesn't explain how everything got there in the first place. Natural selection, it doesn't operate at the level of the genes, it only operates at the physical level, what we call the phenotype, not the genotype. So everything has to be there in order to be selected for. And if you take something away, you have less. So if you've got 3 in a species, and natural selection selects 2 of them, you've only got 2 left. So natural selection is not something that creates anything, it only takes away from what's already there. So that's one of the drawbacks that critics have placed in terms of that theory. Right, now, there was also at the time, the mindset at the time was, as I put up here, that God had created unchangeable, immutable species. So that particular day and age, people believe, generally speaking, that God had created every single species, every single animal upon the earth, and it was unchangeable. So that's something we're going to come back to in a moment. Now, when Darwin brought these ideas back to society, he was actually quite a shy man about it. But luckily for him, he had another man whose name was Thomas Huxley, and you can see he has a far sterner expression on his face. And it was him that championed the ideas of Darwin to the scientific world and to society in general. And he earned the nickname Darwin's Bulldog as a result of that. And he's also credited as well in winning for science a debate against Bishop Wilberforce, which he won not because of the science, but because of the ridicule and contempt placed upon the science by the bishop, which is actually quite sad. And it's a bit of a warning to us as well, in terms of to be careful in how we present things. Now, one point as well, have a look at that hand signal there. I recognise that. That's a Masonic hand signal. All right? And we did a lot about the Masonic agenda when we did the music lectures 2 months ago. So I thought, I wonder if Thomas Huxley was a Mason. So I googled it, and yes, indeed, he's down as being a Mason in many different places. And also, I found out that Darwin's grandfather was also a Mason, and two of Erasmus Darwin's sons, which would have been uncles of Charles Darwin, were Masons as well. So basically, Charles Darwin came from a Masonic family. Then I found a very interesting video which showed how and why Masonry welcomed the theory of evolution and decided that they were going to champion it. It doesn't say so I'm only speculating, but maybe Thomas Huxley was put in place because he was a Mason as well. That video link is on the sheet if you want to check that for yourself later. It's quite fascinating. I may refer to it a little bit as we go through, but I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent because we need to stay on track with this. So, this is the journey then that Charles Darwin took around the world. Now, he started off in good old Blighty, of course, Great Britain, and around South America, and eventually he got to this group of islands here, which is known as the Galapagos Islands. And there were many species there that fascinated Darwin. There was the giant tortoises, the giant iguanas that we mentioned last time as well, these huge, almost dinosaur-like creatures. And one thing, though, was a group of finches that really caught his imagination. And it was this group of finches here. And he noticed that there was a huge variety within these finches, which was not displayed on the mainland. On the mainland, songbirds tended to display this kind of variety, not the finches. And he's particularly fascinated by their beaks, for example, and they seemed all to be adapted to different purposes. So you had your ground finches here, for example, with crushing beaks, and you had warbler finch. The warbler finch was fascinating because it could even pick up tools in order to get into trees and to dig food out and that kind of thing. And then you had these around here, the tree finches, and again, their beaks seemed to be adapted to what they were doing. So remember, there was this idea that God had created unchangeable, immutable species. So Darwin looked at these finches and thought, well, obviously these finches are not unchangeable. But what he did then was, he decided, therefore, God did not create unchangeable, immutable species. In fact, there is no God and there is no creation. So that was one of the things that he came up with. We also have to take note of the fact that Darwin knew nothing about genetics. So how traits were passed down from one generation to another was not known at the time. Gregory Mendel, who's known as the founder of genetic science, had done some work, but it was lying on a dust pile in a monastery somewhere and was not out in the public realm. Posthumously, it did come out into the public realm. And that is a very key point, which we're going to be referring back to again. And we'll come back to how Darwin might have concluded differently had he known much more about genetics in the first place. Okay, there was another reason why Darwin threw God out of the equation. And in order to understand that properly, we're just going to remind ourselves of some of the things that the Bible says about creation, and then it will all become clear. So, Genesis 1, verse 31, God saw all that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. So this creation was very good. It was perfect when the world was created. And then here, Genesis 1, 26 to 28, and God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him. Do you think God is trying to tell us something there? 4 times he said we were created in his image. All right, so for emphasis, male and female created he them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So there was a definite plan to this creation. Why did God create people? Well, Isaiah 43 verse 7 says this, for I have created him for my glory, I have formed him, yes, I have made him. So humankind is not just some off afterthought. Humankind was created in the image of God and for the glory of God. Well, there are some people in the world today that don't seem to want to reflect that heritage at all. Genesis 1, 29 to 30. Then God said, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move on the earth, everything that has breath of life in it, I give green plant for food. Every green plant for food. And it was so. So fruits, grains, nuts, seeds, that was the original diet according to this text. And all animals were vegetarian. Now, says scientists, what are you, crazy? There are animals out there that are obviously so designed to kill that it must have been like that from the beginning. But the Bible says there was no death in the beginning. So what is this? What is Genesis? Is it an allegory? Is it a fairy tale? What's the story here? In fact, this was the very other issue that confronted Darwin and made him opt for evolution. Have a look at this. Darwin, in a letter to his friend Dr. Arthur Gray, said, I'm bewildered. I have no intention to write atheistically, but I own that I cannot see as plainly as others do, and as I should wish to do, evidence of design and beneficence on all sides of us. It seems to me too much misery in the world. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent, omnipotent God would have designedly created the echinoderm, that's a category of parasite, with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars, or that a cat should play with mice. In 1844, in the initial draft of his book on the origin of species, he wrote, it is derogatory that the creator of countless systems of worlds should have made by individual acts of his will the myriads of creeping parasites and worms which, since the earliest dawn of life, have swarmed each day of life on land and the depths of the ocean. And then, when he thinks about it more in terms of evolutionary principles, he says, we cease to be astonished that a group of animals should have been transformed to lay their eggs in the bowels and flesh of other sensitive beings, that some organisms should delight in cruelty, that animals should be led away by false instincts, that annually there should be an incalculable waste of pollen, eggs, and immature beings. So Darwin looked at the animals parasitizing and killing, and he concluded there is no loving God in any of this. Well, you see, it depends on how you look at it. It depends on what you allow yourself to see. It might depend on what the media allows us to see it as well. If the Bible is right, then something changed. Okay, so if the Bible is right, then obviously something changed. But science will say that what we see today is so obviously adapted to what it's doing that it must have been like that from the beginning. So a carnivore must always have been a carnivore. Well, again, depends on which set of glasses you're wearing. Genesis 3, 9 to 14. And then the Lord God called to Adam and said, where are you? So he said, I heard your voice in the garden and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. So there's a change straight away. Fear comes in. So as soon as man and woman disobey God, fear starts to come in. Things began to change. And he said, who told you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree which I commanded you that you should not eat? God knew he'd eaten from it. He was just asking him. Then the man says, the woman who you gave to do with me, she gave me of the tree and I ate. He started blaming. And then the Lord God said to the woman, what is this that you have done? And she said, the serpent deceived me and I ate. So she started blaming as well. And isn't it funny, we've been blaming ever since. Right? From that day forward, we find a solution to all our problems by blaming someone else or something else. The kids are skewed because the parents are bad. The parents are bad because their parents are bad. And their parents are bad because they got kicked by an uncle or whatever it was. If there's something wrong with my personality, whether it's my upbringing or it's my environment or it's my background, we blame ever since that day. And then the Lord said to the serpent, because you have done this, you are cursed more than all cattle. Cattle in that sense means all of the animals. More than every beast of the field. On your belly you shall go, and you shall eat dust all of your life. What rubbish, say the scientists. Serpents don't eat dust. Well, that's probably a reference to death. Excuse me. Dust you are, and dust you shall be, you see. So death was coming into the equation. Besides which, imagine if an animal with no hands is eating things off the ground, it would eat dust with it. But I think that's beside the point. I believe that that is a reference there to death in the scriptures. So were snakes different to what they are in the past? Do we have animals today that have rudimentary legs but don't walk on their legs? Yes, we do. Cape dwarf burrowing lizard, there's one there. Burrowing skink, rudimentary legs, there's another, there's another. We have snakes these days that have legs but don't walk on their legs. So the genes for legs are obviously there, but they're not fully expressed. Could it be that the genes in the snake were just switched off like that? That's not evolution, that's just deactivation of genes. A bit like, put my little piano up there, putting plank over the keys on a piano so you can't play those particular keys anymore. Those keys are still there, but you've just lost that particular repertoire. But it could be activated again should circumstances change. But what about the fangs of a snake? Surely they were designed to kill? Well, what is a fang? A fang is just a mechanism for secreting a salival secretion. So there's no reason at all why that wouldn't have been there in the first place to dissolve and to digest food. Tough plant material, for example, could be one of the options. And then, with a slight modification of the expression of the same genes in the salival glands, that particular venom, or whatever you'd like to call it, becomes more vehement and it creates an allergic reaction. Having said that, any foreign protein that enters into us will create a reaction, as we're going to see a little bit later. It's the same with a spider. When a spider bites, it injects a salival secretion, again for digesting purposes. And a spider, it has what we call a web, of course. And did you know that some spiders live on pollen that is caught in a web, or can survive on pollen for part of their life cycle? We know from the fossil record that there were thousands and thousands and thousands more plants than we have now. So could it be there were far more dispersed seeds in the air, far more variety of seeds? Which, if that was the case, and the spider was catching those in his web, he would have been able to survive on that and not have needed to survive on anything else, ever. Okay, so that's another thing we need to bear in mind. Genesis 3:17 to 18. And Adam said, to Adam he said, because you have listened to your wife and ate fruit from the tree about which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you, so the ground is cursed. Through painful toil you will eat fruit from it all the days of your lives. It will produce thorns and thistles for you. So the Bible's telling us what's going to happen. And you will eat plants of the field. So the ground has suddenly been cursed. Does this mean that the ground doesn't yield what it did before? And if that happens, if you've got limited resources, you might have to add greater variety of what's left. So maybe that's where the eating from the plants of the field has to come in. So, as an example, imagine then that you're a creature adapted to eating apricots. And the apricots are there all year round, and everything's fine, you never have to eat anything else. Then suddenly, the ground is cursed, seasonality starts coming in, and for 9 months of the year, the apricots aren't there. What do? You've got two options. Either you die, or you adapt your lifestyle and start to eat something else. That's your only two options. Okay, so a thorn. What actually is a thorn? Let's have a look at, we're going to look at thorns and thistles. But a thorn is actually a modified stem. So it's exactly the same genes, there's no new information there, but they are expressed in a different way. So instead of carrying on growing, like a stem would do and then bearing leaves, it simply dries out, goes hard, and forms a thorn. And it's exactly the same with a thistle. The spines of a thistle, all these are modified petals. So the gene, instead of unwinding the petal, it simply winds up itself, goes hard, forms a sharp point, and there you have a thistle. And because it's done that, same with the thorns as well, these plants can then survive in much drier conditions, and conditions that were much less favourable than before. So if the ground's been cursed, doesn't yield what it did before, then these things, these adaptations, needed to take place. Right, now the Bible says everything was perfect, there was no death. Some very handsome fellows in those pictures. Surely one animal wasn't eating another, thought Darwin. So now you probably have millions of varieties of worms all doing their thing in an original environment. And then after the fall, suddenly some of them become parasites. But God looked at, or Darwin rather, looked at the parasites and thought, would God create parasites? No, of course he wouldn't. Surely he didn't create animals to live in the bowels of and the flesh of other animals. So the Bible is wrong, and the evolutionary paradigm is a better explanation. Well, let's think about a tapeworm, for example, this very interesting looking creature here. Does a tapeworm have a digestive tract? No. Do the free-living flatworms have digestive tracts? Yes. Very interesting. So imagine a tapeworm then, he gets himself ingested into the stomach and the bowels and the gut of another animal. Then he realises he needs to protect himself from the enzymes. So again, the genes adapt, so he gets himself protected. Then all the food coming through is already pre-digested for it, so it doesn't need the digestive tract. So what happened to the digestive tract that it had? Just deactivate the genes, switch off the digestive tract, and there you have a parasite. Was it designed to be a parasite in the first place? Or did it become a parasite because circumstances changed? Alright, pathogens. Now then, these are the bacteria and viruses and colds and the flus that we catch. Now, this is a normal E. coli that you tend to have in your gut, the healthy E. coli. Now, if that gets transported to another part of the body, or if we ingest it, like we do with colds and flus, it reacts by secreting compounds like this, and suddenly you get very sick from it. But all it is a translocated species. It's a species that now trying to survive in the wrong place, and as a result, these things happen. But the scientists would say, yeah, but if we look at them, we get new colds, we get new flus every year. The flus are evolving. And this is put forward in the media as big evidence of visible evolution. Is it evolution? No. If we look at it, plasmids, these are small DNA fragments that are known from almost all bacterial cells. Plasmids carry between 2 and 30 genes. Some seem to have the ability to move in and out of the bacterial chromosome. So here we have a donor chromosome, here, donor cell. There's your DNA. The DNA comes out, it goes into the recipient cell, and then a small fragment there, that's your plasmid just there, eventually gets spliced into the existing DNA, and it becomes what we call a recombinant. Certain types of bacteria can donate a piece of their DNA to a recipient cell. The recombination is a bacterial equivalent of sexual reproduction. Note the entire DNA is not usually transferred, only a small piece. Question, is there anything new here, or is the existing material simply being transferred and spread around? The existing material has simply been transferred and spread around. So, acquired immunity and resistance to pesticides, herbicides and antibiotics is not based on new genetic material, i.e. it's not evolution, but that's why we get new colds and new flus every year, because these bacterial cells are exchanging information. But there's nothing new there. If there's nothing new, it's not gaining any new information, there's no evolution in any of these processes. Right, now then, barnacles. I was down in Yeovil, and when we travelled to Weymouth and Lyme Regis last week, and we did a bit of crab catching, that kind of thing. And on the rocks, you can see these little shell-like creatures. Some of them were limpets, and some of them were barnacles. And they're quite sharp as well. You've got to watch where you're stepping. If you're wearing flip-flops, so you're not wearing anything on your feet. But a barnacle is a little crab-like creature with a shell. And there's a certain parasite barnacle that looks very different to this, of the genus Succulina. So that's its technical name. It's a barnacle that parasites other crabs, bigger crabs. And what happens is the adults are internal parasites called the interna, and tumours grow inside their hosts. I'll show you in a minute. And these tumours can develop a system of branching roots that ramify through the host bodies and absorb their nutrients. The life cycle of such creatures comprises two stages: an endo, which is the inside stage, and an ecto, which is the outside parasitic stage. So when it's spawned, it's like a normal larva, just like any other barnacle, and the genes are there for forming the whole barnacle, but then it finds itself in trouble, competing with other barnacles, so it crawls inside another crab. And then once inside the crab, it then loses everything. It doesn't develop any of its features, it doesn't look like a crab anymore. There it is. You wouldn't say that was a barnacle, you wouldn't say it was a crab. It's got no legs, no filtering system, it just develops a kind of a web, a reproductive system, and that's all it is. And for everything else, it gets it all from the host. Was it designed to do that in the first place? Or did it decide it had to do that in order to survive and to change circumstances? Right, now this is one of my favourites. This is what you call a mosquito, as you probably know, or in Australia I think they call them mozzies. I only know that from watching Neighbours when I was a teenager. Mozzies! Right, okay. And the mosquito has this wonderful proboscis, as it's called here. And when a mosquito's buzzing around, everything's fine, right? As soon as it goes zip, then you know you've got a problem. Right, but did you know that it's only the female mosquito that sucks blood? So what does the male do? Well, kind and gentle as all males are on this planet. It takes the proboscis and it sucks only plant juices, whereas the female sucks blood. Now, we've already said this, we've got far less variety of plants than we used to have. Maybe the plant that the female used to use in order to get all the nutrients to nurture her eggs and her young has died out. So it just simply takes the same device, plugs it in somewhere else, and what could be better than blood? With all those nutrients and lovely vitamins and all kinds of things within inside the blood. So basically, that was probably designed to be a plant eater, but had to change, or the female had to change, because resources dwindled, but the male is still there to remind us of what the original diet almost certainly was. Okay, so what about wasps then, and bees and hornets and all these stinging fellows? Surely they were designed with this stinger here to inflict great pain upon other creatures? Well, what actually is a sting? A sting is nothing more than a transformed ovipositor. It's their central purpose is there for laying of eggs, and the secretion that comes out of there is simply to nurture and lubricate the eggs. But again, if it's injected into an animal or a person, because it's a something foreign being injected into us, we respond by basically having an allergic reaction to it. One thing Darwin pointed out was the fact that they also live on caterpillars, so we'll address that in a moment. But a bee as well, this isn't a key point, with a bee, it has a barb attached to it, and if it stings you, it cannot pull the barb back out. So basically, it loses important muscles, it loses part of its digestive tract, loses part of its reproductive system, and it pays with its life as a result. So was it designed to do that in the first place, or did it end up doing it because it found that was one of the ways of trying to survive? There's a bee eating a caterpillar, there it is. And was that designed necessarily to be there to eat caterpillars, or did its original diet dry up, which forced it to? Here's an example that we can watch basically today. So with a ladybird. Ladybirds are a pest in South Africa during the apricot season. They're a pest because they will eat little holes in the apricots. So during that season, they need to be controlled. But then during the rest of the year, the apricots are gone. So what does the ladybird do? Well, it then goes from being a vegetarian, just eating apricots, to a vicious carnivore feeding on plant lice for the rest of the year. So suddenly it becomes a very, very useful creature to have around. And then when that season's over and the apricots are back, it goes back to the apricots again, because that's his preferred diet. Maybe that was his original diet. How often does the Bible say the tree of life will bear fruit? Yes. In Revelations 22 verse 2, Ezekiel 47 verse 12, it tells us that it will bear fruit every month. So that's in the new world. So if that was the case, or if that's going to be the case, why wouldn't every other fruit bear itself every single month as well? It just cannot do so now because we have seasonality. Right, Isaiah 65:17 has this to say, "For behold, I create new heavens and a new earth, and the former shall not be remembered or come to mind." So there's going to be a restoration of the original world as well. 2 Peter 3:13, so in the Old Testament and the New Testament it talks about it. "Nevertheless, we, according to his promise, look for new heavens and a new earth wherein dwells righteousness." And Romans 8:21-22 says, "Because the creature itself also shall be delivered from the bondage of corruption into the glorious liberty of the children of God. For we know that the whole creation groaneth and travaileth in pain until now." So this fall of man, fall of people, affected everything. Not just the people, but the animals as well. We're all in it together. Right, Isaiah. This is a very interesting one. Isaiah 11:6-9. The wolf shall live with the lamb. The leopard will lie down with the goat. The calf and the lion and the yearling together, and a little child will lead them. The cow will feed with the bear. The young will lie down together, and the lion will eat straw like the ox. So the lion is going to become a vegetarian in the new world. The infant will play near the cobra's den, and the young child will put his hand into the viper's nest. They will neither harm nor destroy on all my holy mountain, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. So kids are going to be able to play with snakes without any fear. Now I'm not sure that this is quite what the text has in mind. Whoa. Besides which, the snake, as we've already seen, is very unlikely to look like that anymore, and it will probably behave differently as well. I'll show you some experiments that have proved that with other animals a little bit later. But the scientists will say, well, surely this is a fairy tale, right? Surely it's a fairy tale. Carnivores are designed to be carnivores because they have these powerful teeth. Look at them. And these canines can rip you apart. They're designed to do that in the first place. Well, a Russian scientist called Dmitry Baliev, he studied the process of domestication of foxes. And what he did was, he started to breed groups of foxes together. So it was all one gene pool to start with. And then when he had the litters, he took the ones that were more comfortable with the humans, and he bred them together, and on it went. And after 8 generations, these foxes were willing to socialise with the humans. And then after just 13 generations, it was just like dogs. They would lie at the feet, they would lick their handlers, they would ask for food when they were hungry. And he saw an amazing change in these animals over a relatively short period of time. He also looked at their adrenaline glands and noticed that they were smaller, so the animal was calmer. And the serotonin levels in the brain rose by almost double. And if you have a schizophrenic, for example, and he's going to a psychiatrist and the doctor will normally prescribe serotonin so that the patient is much more calm. So if that can be achieved within just a few generations, that's not evolution. Evolution is meant to take place over millions and millions of years. And this is within the gene pool that's already there. Remember, Darwin knew nothing about genes. Right, key point. He knew nothing about genes when he came to his conclusions at that particular stage. Okay, bears. Wow. Look at the teeth on a bear, and the bear has claws. Surely it's got to be designed to be a carnivore, and it's classed as a carnivore. And there you have the bear catching a salmon, doing the salmon run there. And looks like he's going to get it as well, actually. The salmon looks fairly unsuspecting as to what's about to take place. But unfortunately for the bear, the salmon run takes place just when the snow is melting, so there's not much other food around, because it's all covered in snow. So he has to resort to these means. What does he eat the rest of the time? Let's have a look. Grass. Grass and berries. That's what he eats. Succulent grass. In fact, up to 86% of a bear's diet can be plants and grasses. He's actually called a bear because the word bear was originally singular for berry. And that's where he got his name from in the first place. What about a panda? Well, that's classed as a carnivore as well. But all he eats, of course, is bamboo. And he obviously gets enough from the bamboo, so he doesn't need to eat anything else. And there's some fossils there showing many of the different plants and the ferns and the cycads that we used to have in fossil records that no longer exist today. But luckily for the panda, there's enough bamboo around, and he just about manages to survive on that, so he doesn't need to eat anything else. And it's the same with the koala bear as well. He eats eucalyptus. He's a different kind of bear, but he eats eucalyptus, and then he has a snooze, then he eats more eucalyptus, and then he has another snooze. So he sleeps about 80% of his life. But he's obviously getting enough from the eucalyptus. Right, and this one here, red panda. Now these are classified as carnivores. I think it's quite cute as well, don't you think? Right, and yeah, if you look at the claws he's got the equipment to kill, and he's got the canines to kill as well. But this was in an Australian zoo, and the sign read, red pandas are classified as carnivores, but most of its diet is bamboo. So it doesn't necessarily follow that having the equipment to kill necessarily means you're using it to kill other animals. You can be using it for other things as well. More examples to follow. So this must be quite discouraging for the scientific world in some ways, because all of a sudden, a lot of the animals are not doing what they're supposed to be doing according to science. Right, now this is another one of my favourites. And this took a while to get my head around. But if we look at the, this is a generalised anatomy of a fish. We can see it's got all kinds of interesting structures, from its brain to its liver to its kidneys to its urinary bladder. But inside the kidney, there's a very interesting structure which is called the glomerulus. And basically, this is a nice little filtering machine. And the blood comes in down here, and then the fluids gather over here, and it extracts the salts, and then it urinates the fluid out. Now then, fish in the sea, all fish have this structure. Fish in the sea, they don't use it. It's a calamity to them, because the salt water content, of course, is higher than the salt within themselves, so they don't need that structure. The last thing they need to be extracting more salt when they're surrounded by salt water. So it's a calamity. And then fish in the fresh water, but they need that structure because the fresh water has less salt than they need, so they need to be conserving it as much as they possibly can. And this is an interesting one. So all fish have it, but most of them don't use it. Interesting problem. Other fish, like the salmon, which we just saw one being devoured by a bear, but like the salmon, they can switch it on in the fresh water and off in the salt water. So they can jump from one to another. So genes can be switched off and on again within this one generation. Very interesting to know. And science is constantly battling with this idea. Now, did fish therefore evolve in the salt water, or did, on the other hand, evolve in the fresh water? Well, the sea's so much bigger, it must have evolved in the salt water, but if it evolved in the salt water, why has it got a glomerulus? Why has it got it? So this tells me that if all of them have it, and most of them don't use it, then maybe things were different in the past. Perhaps all was fresh water, and salt water as we know it today is a consequence of the subterranean water, which is often high in salt, that the Bible says came up during the flood. Very, very interesting. Okay, something a bit closer to home now. This is our kidney. And inside our kidney, there it is, we have a little cross-section there, and we have some interesting structure here, which is called the loop of Henle. And this is a structure designed for concentrating our urine. So if we're in very hot conditions, or we're walking in deserts, whatever it is, we need to conserve water,
the loop of Henle will kick in, and all of a sudden we have a highly concentrated urine. But did you know that this structure won't work unless it's exactly like that? That's what we call irreducible complexity. We saw some examples in the dinosaur lecture where we looked at the eye of an insect, and it was perfect little mirrors, and if one of those tiny little mirrors was off, then the whole eye would work. It has to be there, complete, perfect. Natural selection cannot create it, it cannot develop incrementally, no half measure will do, it has to be there, done, finished, sorted, or be useless. How did that come about? You've got two options, chance or design. Wouldn't mind doing a whole talk on that, actually, coming up in a few weeks' time, hopefully. Right, what did Darwin say about this? We're going to go to break after this, by the way. In The Origin of Species, Darwin wrote, if it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. But I could find no such case. Now, maybe in his day, it was difficult to find cases of this because he only had relatively primitive instruments to look at things through. But now with the kinds of microscopes we've got that can magnify so many times better, we've been able to drill down into all kinds of organisms, and we've found amazing complexity, such as could never have developed or sprung up from anything else, but it's certainly not through natural selection. So by his own words, his own theory has broken down since we found all these things. And in many other examples, the Krebs cycle is another example. That's the process that creates energy in a cell. Amazingly complex. Another one, the flagella motor. We talked about this in a previous lecture, which is the motor in a bacteria. And it's got 42 different working parts to it, and all of those parts have to be there for it to work. And sometimes, you probably, if you've done your research, you'll notice that science will often come up with plausible explanations for these things. But when you actually examine those plausible explanations, you often realise that it's simply inference and conjecture. It's imaginary, it's never been spotted. And one of the things I read recently was that scientists said, well, this whole problem of irreducible complexity, basically, in different parts of the body, you probably had all those different parts that needed for that structure, and then they all came together and then formed that structure. Has that ever been observed happening? No. So what's that? It's inference and conjecture. This comes from the mind. It's never been seen. But a lot of people will swallow that and think, oh yeah, well there you go then. Plausible explanation, sorted. But that's not the case, all right? Unless you've actually seen it, and you can repeat it in the present, it's not true science. And that's what a lot of people fail to realise as well. So by Darwin's own explanation, his theory has broken down. All right, and on that note, we're going to have a quick break. Thank you for listening so far. We'll come back in like 5-10 minutes, and then we'll go through some more material and information.